Welcome and thank you everybody for joining us for another episode of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. I'm Richard Restuccia, your host and Vice President of Water Management Solutions for Jane Irrigation. And today I'm really excited to be talking about plant and irrigation best practices during the drought. Now, one of the reasons I'm excited about this is, well, number one, I love plants as well as irrigation, and certainly we are experiencing a tough drought all through the West right now. And so when I can get a real expert like we have today to speak about both these subjects, it's a good day for me. And I know it's going to be a good day for all of you, right? Because once again, it's not just what happens to your plants during the summertime that matters, but often how you deal with your plants or care for your plants in particular during the drought sets them up for winter and then next year too. So it's a very important time. And the person helping us today is Stacey Sturnot. And Stacey is somebody I've known now for about 10 years, I think. We worked together at Valley Crest, and Stacey had the responsibility of Valley Crest, one of Valley Crest, and maybe the largest maintenance account for the whole company. And, she has a great reputation for her business skills and her knowledge. At the time, this was important, right? Dealing with such a large multi-million-dollar account, because if you lost this account, it meant literally hundreds of people lost their jobs. And so there was a lot of pressure. This was an account that might get renewed every couple of years, and a lot of stress there, but Stacey handled the business side. Stacey's now the executive operations manager for Landscapes USA, and doing a great job for Landscapes USA as well. She's got 27 years experience in the green industry. She helps not only her LUSA, Landscapes USA, she also helps with the CLCA, helping the industry in general, and of course, helping us today. So I mentioned earlier, she's got great business skills, and more importantly though, for today, she's also got excellent knowledge about plants, about varieties, and most importantly for today, what works during a drought. So Stacey, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And I've often said you haven't lived a summer till you live a summer in landscape. And certainly we're in August now, so you're more than halfway through. How's it going so far?
Thanks again for that great introduction too, Richard. The summer is going how it always does. Every year we kind of start ramping up around April 1st and usually lasts till October, peak growing season out here in Southern California anyway. It's always a little harder on everybody. We find different ways to manage labor and manage the plant growth. Obviously, this year it's been a little bit different with, the last year or two of COVID trends and that culture kind of changing for labor and everything else. But, typical landscape summer, it's always a little hotter, a little harder on everybody. So we try to make sure that we let the team know how much we appreciate all the hard work they're doing. Talking about the weather a little bit earlier, I grew up landscaping in Wisconsin, so that humidity was a little bit different during the summer too. And, out here, it's all different. So that adaptability, just like we have to do with our plant material, is really key to the summer.
So Stacey, our customers, so I have two questions about customers right now. One, the supply side or the supply issue and labor issue is big in landscape right now. Mm-hmm. Are customers settling into or lowering their expectation of when they're receiving things and when things are happening, or are they still being very demanding?
It really kind of depends, I think, on the client, on the type of client. I can only speak for, what we do. Most of our business is in either HOA or commercial. I know there's probably a lot of other landscapers out there that do custom residential or something a little bit different, maybe city work and that kind of thing. So I see on the HOA side, they're still very demanding because for still most of the case, a lot of people are working from home. So whether they're homeowners or board members, everybody is still at home viewing the landscape for most of their day. And so there's still a demand for making sure it looks nice. On the commercial side of things, there's a little more adaptability because on both ends, I guess, because there's been less leasing, less tenants in all of the spaces. So that's changed the landscape climate a little bit, as well as kind of pushed back the demand too, because you don't have as many people visiting large commercial facilities or industrial parks and that kind of thing. As far as the supply goes, I know it's been happening for a while on the chemical and irrigation part side for us. Just being able to get material at the right time. Plant material has been something that's happened recently, just from the demand, not only across the country. Here in California, there's a lot of growers, right? A lot of nurseries, a lot of field grown operations, and the other operations throughout the country that haven't been able to adhere to the demand across the country, whether it be frost that started last year or just kind of the up and purchasing, they have. So we're getting a lot of our nurseries emptied out here. I used to manage the inventory. I was inventory control manager over at local nursery here in Miramar. It's Village now. But, it was kind of this up and down cycle of the season with plant material, knowing how many thousands of plant plugs you needed to grow in and when and buy in. And sometimes there was also the plant trends, and that's definitely changing now. You can see that trend just kind of dropping, and we all have to get different plant material and just make sure that we communicate that with our clients.
Yeah, so are clients asking for more today than they were a couple years ago, drought tolerant native plants?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember, let's say even 12 years ago when this kind of first started, our last drought, and rebates started becoming available from local water industries. And that kind of started things, but nobody was really interested at the time, just kind of wondering, well, if I'm spending my money on this, is it worth it? I think the people have seen the ROI over the years, the ones that have done it. And now, of course, with water prices rising, it's become more of a demand. It's also kind of a fashion trend. I mean, there's a lot of different plants. We'll plant succulents somewhere and they'll be stolen. People really like them, whether people are walking by through a mall or homeowners walking through HOAs. They look cool, they're different, they're low maintenance, and save on water. And so it becomes kind of this fashion trend of what people like. I think plants go through that all the time. When I first moved to San Diego about 22 years ago, there was a much different plant palette. I was always planting robelinis, birds of paradise, Rhaphiolepis, agacanthus, and now that's changed, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you ran through some of those names, I'm like, wow, that's like all the HOAs I see that were built in the 80s and 90s. That's
Yep.
the plan.
Mm-hmm.
So help us out here for a second. What's your definition? What do you consider a native plant?
So really, by definition, a native plant is anything indigenous to that area. So whether it's here in San Diego, whether it's Australia or Wisconsin or New York, it's anything that grows indigenous to that area, meaning not touched by humans, right? So they're able to have a symbiotic relationship with the surrounding environment. So really when that affects it, and how it affects obviously how we landscape and irrigate, is when we're putting a native plant in an area that may or may not need water, or different kinds of cultural touch, so we're treating it a little bit differently. Drought tolerant is also something that a native can be. It just really depends on that indigenous area.
Right. So right. So that was my next question: is what's the difference between drought tolerant and native? And it's interesting. A few years years ago, I wrote a blog about drought tolerant or native plants, and somebody raked me over the coals saying that a drought tolerant is just a marketing term that people have come up with in the plant industry, and I didn't necessarily agree with that. But
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, drought tolerant is basically any plant that can withstand little to no water for a certain period of time. It doesn't mean that it can withstand a drought for 3 years. Your plant's going to die depending on that plant. There's plants that live in Africa, live in the desert, that store water for years. You see saguaro cactus here and that kind of thing. And that is set up a little bit differently. So something that's drought tolerant is something that can, whether it be for the summer or whether it be for a year, it's just a seasonality of not having as much water. kind of in comparison, there's native plants material, again, use where I'm from, Wisconsin, right? There's tons of native plant material in Wisconsin, but they're not necessarily drought tolerant because that's not the climate of Milwaukee or anywhere in the interior of that state. Now here in San Diego, for example, there's plant material that is native. Let's take ceanothus. If it's California lilac, right? Grows throughout California a lot. Bright purple flowers in the spring. It's drought tolerant because its native habitat doesn't get water during the summer. Here we don't typically get the wonderful Midwestern thunderstorms in the summer. So it's used to not having any water throughout after spring, through the summer and into the winter when we start getting rains again. So it's drought tolerant through that summer period. And even though it's native. And so that's where we need to look at that when we put that in the landscape.
Yeah, that's interesting, and as you mentioned before, we had trends and we're having trends. And I just want to mention to everybody that we've got the Q&A and the chat open. If you want to ask Stacey a question, put them in there and I'll go ahead and make sure we ask those. But so speaking of trends, right, what are some of the trends we're seeing right now in drought tolerant native plants? What's getting popular?
I do see the succulents a lot. They continue to get more popular, especially in the HOAs or retail centers, for example, hotels. A lot of people like to put them in pots. Still, removing fountains and putting them in different artistic situations, especially living walls. That's a big thing, especially now as we kind of grow our urban areas, downtown and retail centers that are kind of those live work retail areas. They do a lot of rooftop gardens and living walls with succulents and different kind of material like that. Kind of over the last couple of years, it was a little bit of a trend for Australian natives. I know we grew that a lot at the nursery, and kind of just like any, I guess, native plant, there's, whether it becomes a trend for landscape companies or just homeowners, clients, if they see something decline, they kind of go, okay, well, I don't like this plant, it doesn't work here. So that's where we need to look at the culture of the plant and really make sure that we're giving it the right amount of water, sunlight, because it's native to somewhere else other than here. So Australian natives kind of had their time in and out. I personally adore them and I try to use them everywhere too, because they typically fit that wide range that our clients are looking for. They're looking for low maintenance, colorful, right? Something pretty, because we definitely fell away from doing that annual color change every quarter. So something colorful, low maintenance, low pests and disease, and something that's available, like we talked about earlier. So that is really what everyone's looking for. So whether that means native or drought tolerant, here, what I see locally, that's what they're looking for. The native trend kind of goes in and out. It really depends on the property too. The local kind of consensus with that is they look so ugly during many times of year. And, we have this idea that they're so beautiful and colorful, and then the rest of the year when they're maybe not getting water or what's natural to them, they go dormant. And so that's something that definitely needs to be discussed with your client and making sure that they're aware of what it looks like through all seasons of the year.
Yeah, so you reminded me of a couple things. One, I saw a fountain just the other day, and they had taken the water out of the fountain, put plants in, succulents.
Mm-hmm.
And at the top of the fountain, it was one of these cascading fountains. I don't know what the scientific name is, but it's the fish hook,
Right.
that runs down and over the side. It actually looked like water. I thought somebody did
Very
a pretty
cool.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It can do some creative things with those plants. A little alien looking, different, cool structure.
yeah. And then I was thinking about the Australian plants, and it seemed like maybe 10 years ago, I don't know, early 2011, 12, everybody was putting in, again, common name, kangaroo paws. This was, right, it was everywhere.
Right.
And I don't see them very much anymore. Are the Australian plants out?
Yeah, and that was actually the exact year that I worked at the nursery, Richard. And, we were big on the Australian natives at the time. I mean, we were propagating and bringing in so many different types of Anaxanthus, the kangaroo paw. And what we found in a lot of feedback from our customers was that the dwarf ones didn't grow as well. There's certain plants when they're hybridized so much or change so much in their genes that they just don't typically work for a long period of time. I think a lot of landscapers here have seen that with New Zealand flax formium. Obviously came from Australia and New Zealand as well. And then they started getting crown rot here. They would have mildew issues, or the hybrids would revert back to the bronze or the green. So that's something that they would see happen and kind of get like those reversions of weird growth. And whether it was a dwarf pink one, it would end up having kind of a large red flower and that kind of thing. It really stuck to the red and yellow. And then they started getting crown rot as well because it's management of irrigation and the soils here. I can, again, only speak for Southern California. It's actually the same as Wisconsin, super heavy, hard clay. And that is not good for, a plant that has an indigenous sandy soil that needs good drainage.
So Stacey, we have a question from one of our viewers, and the question is, what are your top 3 favorite bulletproof plants? Ones that are going to do well, drought or no drought, cold, warm weather. Now, it is Southern California, and so you don't see too much of the extremes. But do you have 3 that are really, at the top of your list as favorites
Good
for this?
question. One, I'll kind of out myself right away. I made fun of Rhaphilepis earlier, but there's a variety called Umbellata minor. And it's a little bit different. You don't see it grown anywhere planted as much. It's more compact, really dark green leaves. Has a really cool structure, and you don't need to trim them. They don't have that hedge look. So again, drought tolerant, super easy maintenance. And when I say drought tolerant with that too, we'll talk about this soon as well, is just obviously there's an establishment period, and once something's established, then it can have some lower water use. But those are one of my favorites because they're a good accent. We have to use them a lot in narrow planting areas. So in some HOAs where there's garage after garage, and then there's one little planter in between each garage, that's a perfect plant for that scenario. Another one that I really like that is the Prunus caroliniana for the same kind of use. One of my favorites also is Grevillea, and again, Australian native. And there are so many different types and varieties. I think there's still a lot of local nurseries here that grow. You can get some such as the Long John that grow 12 to 18 feet tall. And then some other Noellii and different varieties that stay, only a foot tall. Lots of different flowers, flower color, foliage. So I just like things that are a little bit different in that respect. And then sages. Sages and ceanothus are a couple of my favorite California natives. And they're really useful and beautiful in landscapes here, whether it be, retail, commercial, or HOAs. We just need to make sure we're educating the clients on what they'll look like certain times of the year when we have to renovate them and cut them back all the way or cut back blooms. But those are kind of some of my top ones that I use in lots of designs.
Yeah, those are great. Some of my favorites as well. Love the colors, especially of some of the blooms. Do you have any photos or any examples of these by any chance?
Yeah, that's great. Sorry, bear with me too. Yeah, a lot of them we'll use in different projects too. Like I said, everybody has their favorites, and oops, sorry, I'm having a little trouble here. Everyone kind of uses their favorites and kind of sticks with those. I tend to do that as well.
Now, while you're looking there, I want to ask you too, do drought tolerant and native plants, do they have to be irrigated?
Good question, Richard. They do. And like I mentioned earlier, anytime you put in a new plant, you have to have some sort of establishment period based on what plant that is. So definitely need to water them a little bit more. Depending on how it needs to be prepared based on your soil and your area. Could be new construction to making sure you have organic additives, amendments to the soil, fertilization. Natives here anyways do not typically like fertilizer because they are already indigenous to that area, right? So they might not need, see a lot of landscape companies just going, okay, well, we're just going to put a shrub fertilizer, triple 15, throw it on there, it'll be fine. And that's not what the plant needs right away. It needs an establishment period of irrigation, and then you can dial that down, which we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that too. But yes, everything needs some establishment period, and then you can back off that based on the culture of the plant. This picture that I'm showing here is a recent construction installation project that Landscapes USA did for one of our clients. It's kind of in the La Jolla UTC area. And we actually use Jane drip line all along these parkways here along the road, and then MP rotators throughout the slope. There's a large slope, it's about a mile in length. But we completely eradicated, comes back a little bit, the red apple ground cover, which uses tons of water and tons of fertilizer to stay green. So we completely converted the irrigation system. One thing that was really cool, the HOA got a donation from the city of San Diego for 150 trees, their Chinese pistache. So we planted those all along the parkway there, and they all have their separate irrigation systems. So all of the trees are on separate valves with the tree ring of Jane drip line. And then all of this is Carissa green carpet, which is actually one of my favorites too, because it is super low maintenance, handle some short periods of drought as well, low water use, we also like to say, right? And pretty hardy. I mean, there's dogs, people that walk through here, people throw trash, there's homeless situations, up and down the wall here and on the street. So pretty hefty plant, durable for that kind of abuse. So those are some of my favorites here. This to the right hand side, you'll see kind of a lower ground cover. That's Ceanothus. This was probably only a month ago, so it was done blooming pretty purple by then. And then that's Tacoma yellow bells, Tacoma stands yellow bells, kind of a hybrid Tacoma, which they're all on the same water. They're all getting low water use MPs. We have ET controllers there as well. So everything is programmed the way it should be with the correct data of soil, type of plant material. We had to switch it from turf or red apple to the type of plant material. And then also put in, what type of plant material in sunny or shady exposure, and the ET controller. Basically, we're still dialing it in because we just finished this probably about a month ago, 2 months ago. But yeah, so this is kind of the whole area up and down. We also have bougainvillea and some other California natives that are all on the same irrigation system, except for this parkway here with the trees and the Carissa.
So Stacey, this area is, that was just west of the 805, right, on Nobel.
Correct.
Yeah, I just drove by that about a week and a half ago.
Oh,
and
nice.
the other people in the car with me, first of all, the trees did catch our eye. I mean, that was a
good.
beautiful installation. They look fantastic. And then we caught all the streetscape too, and the job's beautiful. You guys did a really good job on it.
Thank you.
We drove by a lot of landscape that day. We didn't know we were going to be in that area, and then we were like, wow, would you look at this? So yeah, really, really nice job there.
Oh, good, thank you. Here's another photo, if I can pull it up. This is also kind of in the same area. It's a science lab, and we've had the property for quite a while, and go figure, it was all red apple here that you see. That is turf. That green area is turf there, but everything where you see a plant was all completely red apple. And so we took that out. It was all about 6-inch pop-ups, kind of a mix of just different, heads. Changed that all to Jane drip and put tree rings around these magnolias here. Those were stressed for a while too, because they were in the middle of, getting turf water and then not enough water from the shrub zone. So we separated those out. Again, trees are on their own separate irrigation zone. We also did some deep fertilization with those and some scale treatment, and those really pop back. That's why you see a couple that were, a little bit thinner than others. But we put in all new plant material. We've got some aloes there. Leonotis, which is a bright orange flowering, looked amazing this spring with all of the hummingbirds and butterflies hanging out. The New Zealand flax, that was actually there and we kept it there because it was doing well. And then Fucrea mediopecta alba, which is one of my nerdy favorites. And those are those kind of variegated, large agave looking plants here behind that sign. Those again, pretty drought tolerant and just have a really nice structural accent, all drip line underneath. And there's also Hesperello and some other Callilopus hartwigii, which is a California native as well, that added a pop of yellow color and red color when the Hesperello blooms.
Yeah, so Stacy, I know everybody's talking about Landscapes USA in San Diego, especially when it comes to water management. You guys are building a tremendous reputation for being great water managers and knowing what you're doing about water management. One of the questions that came in here is when you talk to customers about water management, you know, it's sometimes very confusing for them, right? Because sometimes we talk about gallons, inches per hour. We have a lot of different terms.
Right.
How do you guys talk to customers about water? What works there?
Well, that's a great question. One thing I've learned over the many years is, you know, you will always have questions asked, but you know, it's hard because you have to make sure you know your audience, right? So here I'm fine kind of throwing out some botanical terms and that kind of thing. I'm assuming most people are in the industry at least want to know. A lot of times on walkthroughs with clients, they want the basics, right? They want the nitty gritty of it. They want also what is it going to cost me? So rather than getting into the technicalities, unless that is specifically what they're asking for, and we do an ROI for them and we sit down with them and go over the numbers with them, we talk about the basics. And especially if it's something where we're coming on to a new site that is not either currently our client or is a brand new client to us, we want to make sure that they understand the landscape health is most important, starting with the irrigation, right? Because we here are in a climate where we need irrigation in most areas. So making sure that the irrigation comes as first priority, making sure controllers work, making sure there's no leaks, do a full audit of the property, and then just making sure that everyone is aware of what the system is actively doing and what needs to change to make sure we have a healthy landscape. So like this photo that I have here up, that is the same as the previous job, but it's kind of in the middle of the install there. This is where I was describing it was mixed turf, pop-ups, and shrub areas, because the red apple was fine with getting the same amount of turf water, but it was still an older property. All of the heads were mismatched. So really I had the discussion with the client of going, look, you have plants that have a certain need and you have your turf that has a certain need, and you can't expect them to both be healthy if they don't share the same needs. So this is what we would do, and just briefly explain the process. Let's separate the valves. Let's get the trees separate from the shrubs and the turf separate from everything else, and make sure that they're on the right type of irrigation and scheduled for the right amount of time. So that's what we did here. We have the Jane drip line here, and then put in some drainage as well. You see that drain at the bottom, and then the turf we left the same. And then that was all programmed correctly.
Yeah, I love seeing the tree rings around the tree. You know, that's something that you don't see that often, right? It should be done. It should be a standard practice. So it's
right. And the great thing about that too, Richard, is that you'll see that inner line. You know, we put a couple depending on the size of the trees. It can be 3 lines. As the trees grow and expand, it's something that can really easily be removed. You know, just twist off those power locking couplings, make sure everything's tight again, and then take off that inner line, and you can always extend more out, so that you're really encouraging root growth outwards versus, you know, girdling roots and having healthy plant material.
Yeah, that's great. It grows with your tree very easily.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So Stacy, you're getting a lot of people excited about drought tolerant and native plants. And for those of us who are going to go out now later in the week and start planting some more, what types of practices should we be doing to get them established right? Are there certain ways we should water, certain any amendments or anything we should add to our soil to help us? What about that?
Yeah, great question. It's really, like I said earlier, it really depends on the type of plant. So definitely look at that and look at your site as well. We deal with a lot of new construction too. So if you are in that situation where you have new construction, you need to make sure that you're probably taking soil samples first. It's really good, especially like I said, in San Diego, where you have a lot of new construction or heavy clay soils. Take a soil sample, see what's necessary in the amendments, and start with that. You have to evaluate that microclimate and just make sure that you have the right plant material there to begin with. If you have the ability to create a design based off of your location, then that's a great start, because you have the ability to make sure you have the right plants in the right spot. I'm not going to bring plant material from Northern California or from, the Midwest, where it's not going to grow, or put tropical plants in kind of a more arid climate and in Vista here. It's just not going to do it unless you have a different irrigation system. So definitely look at the microclimate that you have, choose the right plant material if you have that ability. Sometimes even if we're given plans and, we'll even have architects from somewhere else that have put plant material in here, I always have that discussion with the client. These plants might not work long term. Is there a substitution that you'd be willing to work with? Or can I work with the landscape architect to make sure that there's plant material that's here long term, rather than just, putting something in that looked good in a book. So, coming from the maintenance side, it's something that needs to happen long term. And I'm in turn looking for the client's best interest. So if they're going to have to spend, another 10 grand in 3 years to replace plant material that they just paid to have put in, that's not a good partnership for anybody. So making sure that we have the right plant material and start with the right amendments. Like I said earlier, if you have California natives, I know they don't typically like those amendments and fertilizers instantly. So get them on the right foot with that. And then of course, with your irrigation, making sure that's on the right system. So, I have a lot of clients ask sometimes, can we just put in new plant material here? Can we do this? And I, even though it is something that I would love to do and, completely clean the slate and put in a new plant palette, I can't do it unless the irrigation system works properly. So, because that ends up being on us too. We're the professionals, we're the ones that have to make the suggestion. And if I'm going, yeah, we can put in new plants and then they don't survive and it's my maintenance account, that doesn't look good long term for us either. So we have to make sure that we're having the right discussion and help the clients budget for that appropriately. Maybe change over the irrigation this year, maybe, go with some rebate programs that can help with the budget that way. And then maybe next year we'll do the plant material. But all of that for the initial install. And then of course, after that, when you're doing the maintenance long term, you want to look at plant health care. And so all of that comes together easily if you have the right plant in the right spot. And then you can go from there. Plant health care is essentially what people call now organic gardening, right? So it's trying to stay away from pesticides and chemicals as much as possible, just by giving the right climate conditions. Plants are just like us. They're living things. And if we have stress or low immunity, then we are more susceptible to diseases. And so that happens with plants. If there's too much water, not enough water, too much sun where they really like shade, they start, burning or getting root rot, like I said earlier, aphids, whitefly, and it really means they're something else, right? Culturally is not the most ideal situation for that plant. So continuing with that ideal situation for the plant helps the long-term availability of the plant.
Yeah, and they rely on us, and especially you and your company, Landscape USA,
right.
to
It's our responsibility to make sure, we're giving the right advice.
Yeah. So what about smart controllers with irrigation system, the real brains of the system? Where does this fit in with native and drought tolerant?
It's really helpful. I mean, like the job site I showed you earlier where we have the ET controllers, it's really helpful because that was dialed in before as a slope. Certain valves were shady areas, certain valves were sunny exposure, But then it also said, red apple, use turf, right? Same amount of water, because it's adjusting based on the type of exposure it has, the soil condition, and the plant material that you have. And so it was a lot easier once we went in and redid everything to just go into the controller, go in on our computer or the app on our phone, and just change over to drought tolerant plants or native plants, and change that exposure, whatever it may be. And then gradually the ET controller will use the weather base that it has, as well as the type of plant that it's really watering, and show the correct schedule. It's a little less maintenance on our end once everything's all tied in, because we're letting the controller do the work and schedule accordingly. And of course, we still have to go out there and monitor, make sure there's, just like any install, there could be some plant material came from the nursery, or it's not installed correctly. Something can happen, and plant material will get lost. So it's continuing monitoring that and monitoring the irrigation. But I think the smart controllers are best for that. I have a saying though over the years, is smart controllers only as smart as the user. It has to be a partnership with whoever is using it. And also, like, we work together quite closely, with the ET and Jane community to make sure that we have people helping us where we need it. And I think that is key. There still has to be some monitoring of it, and making sure that we're all managing it in a good partnership.
Yeah, it's really great points there, Stacey. I really enjoy hearing those. And one thing I noticed a few years ago was we saw this a lot in Arizona. People were wanting to know, how much water are you going to use on my job? They wanted to know that. They even had to put it in your bid. I'm not sure how they compared one to another, right? Because really, it's really a scientific formula based on ET of how much water you're going to use. But that used to happen. What about customers in this day and age in Southern California? Are they talking in terms of how much water do you use? Are how many inches or how many units that I'll be using on my commercial property? Do you hear that?
Yeah, some are. Some don't care, not interested in that. That's not their priority, but there's a lot that are, and I see more of it. Like I said earlier, because of the cost in water rising, and it's still, it's commodity, and we might not have it forever. We want to make sure that we're taking care of our resources, and there's clients that want to make sure of the same thing. They do ask. I mean, there's lots of properties that we will either do meter readings, or the great thing about the ET controllers that I know we provide for our clients are the reports that it creates. So it'll create where ET is set, right? Where based on the weather, it's saying that we should water, and then how many minutes we are actually watering. So we can take that into our client and say, okay, here's where we are. We're totally watering under ET, and maybe there's a spike here last week because we had a main line break or whatever that might be. There's a lot of flow metering that clients are starting to ask for too. We usually include that with smart controller installation so that we can monitor flow. We can have water automatically shut off when there's a break or any other issue, so that there's not wasteful water and their cost of their bill isn't going up. So yeah, it's definitely becoming a trend where people are more concerned and want to know the numbers, especially on the responsibility of us. If they're paying for a conversion to a smart controller and a redo of the whole irrigation system, they're going to hold us accountable and making sure that we're doing what we told them we would do. So being able to prove that we're watering less is a big deal.
Yeah, this is really interesting and so exciting, right? Because on one hand, if you ask most people, where does your water come from and how much does it cost?
Mhm.
They don't really know where it comes from. They just say the ground, and they're not sure. And how much does it cost? They also say, I don't know, it's expensive.
Right.
They don't really
I pay
know.
a lot.
Right. So you go from that to, this is what ET was for the month. This is how much water you use. This is how much water you used last year this month. And this is what the ET was. So maybe we used a little bit more because ET was higher, and maybe we saved some water because ET was lower. But now you take something from I don't know and I don't know to, this is having really meaningful conversations using one tool, right? A
Right.
report generator from your smart controller. It's an amazing span of information in a very short period of time.
Well, it's kind of like anything nowadays, right? We have more technology, the ability to collect data and kind of have a conscious awareness of what we're doing in any aspect. So the fact that we can do that with measuring, the water use, which is direct effect on our resources and our pocketbook of the clients, it's something that becomes more interesting as we realize we have the ability to do it, right? So if we're, initially talking about this with a client and converting possible controllers, that's the first thing they want to know is, well, how much is it going to cost and how much am I going to save?
Yeah.
So bring that all up front. You guys have always been really helpful with coming out with that ROI and evaluating the property and saying, okay, this is how much you're spending and this is how many years, 1 to whatever it'll take to pay that off. And then in the long run, this is the percentage of water of the water bill that you will be paying less for because you're watering smarter, right? More efficiently and in a smarter way. And in those situations that we can monitor flow, I mean, it's so nice to be able to be out of town and get an alert and say you have a break, but the water's off. We don't need to send anybody. That's huge. So yeah, it's having that technology available kind of makes everyone more aware and more excited about it.
Yeah, and then the other thing that's great is to see Landscape USA established as a water management specialist. And all of a sudden, this monthly maintenance amount isn't as important because, gee, we might pay a little bit more for the monthly maintenance, but we're going to make it up in the water savings. We're going to make it up by a lot.
Right.
And this really starts to focus the conversation for the customers in a way they haven't had before. So it's really great to see.
No, that's a great point, Richard. And it might make some people upset saying it, but you get what you pay for. And I've never been the one to say, I'm the cheapest landscaper out there. I don't send out bids to be the cheapest. I won't do it. I've even seen it at the nursery when we had to fluctuate in plant prices, and landscapers were having, requiring lower plant prices because they were passing lower plant prices on to their clients. That was 10, 12 years ago, and prices are still the same. So, I'm a firm believer in, hey, you're hiring a professional to know the right thing, and you might not be paying the lowest possible for your maintenance contract, for example. However, we are saving you X amount by doing this, and that's managing your water properly, et cetera, et cetera. So it all comes out the right way.
Absolutely, and you do get what you pay for, and boy, a really nice, good-looking landscape adds to the value of the entire property. Right?
Absolutely.
It's not just the value of the landscape; it is the building, it's the property, it's the home, it's the association, it's everything. And
Yeah. And it's that pride, especially in an HOA where everybody lives. Everybody wants to have that pride and walk through and feel good. And so that's the part of what I do that I really enjoy.
so let's put your futurist hat on for a second.
Okay.
And what plants do you see getting popular in the next 6 months to a year? From a drought tolerant native trend, is there anything that you think is going to get some extra notoriety?
That's a good question. Nothing really in particular, but like I said earlier, some of the plants with the succulents and just different types of semi-native to California never really kind of stuck. Like when we were trying to push them 12 years ago, they never really stuck. So I just see kind of more of a growing interest in that. And, maybe that would encourage a lot of the plant propagators and, other nurseries to create some different plant material or kind of thrive on that. I was really involved with a lot of the propagation kind of side of things, and it was really neat to see a lot of hybridized or something that can handle less water, more blooms, whatever that may be. So I think a lot of the trend will really be from the growers and kind of going, okay, this is what we need to do. This is the future of the landscape. This is the future of low water use, and developing some plants that can tolerate that a little bit more, with also some pest and disease control, because with all of the Roundup lawsuits and everything else, we're looking for plant material that might be a little more hardy. And if anything can have less chemicals, I think that is a good idea too. So it's not really a specific plant to your question, Richard, but it's probably just a more of a trend. That's something that's easier for everybody to enjoy at this time.
Yeah. Well, Stacey, what a wealth of information you've brought everybody today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Somebody messaged me and said we should just have Stacey on every week. So yeah, very,
Thank
very
you.
interesting. We could go on for a long time on this. It was
Yeah,
really
sorry, I do totally plant nerd out, you know.
no, it was great. I know everybody appreciated it. So thanks so much for coming on today. I hope you'll
Yeah,
come
thanks,
back
man.
in the near future. We can talk maybe about fall plants or what to do with your landscapes over the winter. Either
Yeah,
one of those would be very interesting. We'd love to have you back.
that'd be
I want to
great. Yeah, if anyone has ideas too, feel free to send those in, and yeah, I'd be happy to talk about anything.
Yeah. Okay, great. And I want to say thank you to all our viewers. I really appreciate your time. And remember, you can see all our Jane trainings at the janesusa.com website /trainings. We're also wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts these days. And that seems to have really caught on. I think people are enjoying learning as they're working or driving job to job, using that downtime for something positive. So thank you for that as well. So again, thank you very much, Stacey. We're back on Friday. We've got Mark Eriks, award-winning writer who's talking about water in California. He's just written a book called The Drought Plan, and it really delves into water and agriculture and what's happening with the water in California. It's going to be very good. So again, Stacey, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks
everybody.
everyone.
All right, we'll see you
Sure.
soon. Thank you.